today Annabelle Nunez, class of 82.
Hi, Dominique.
Well, to get started, what's the best advice you could give a Pueblo student?
I think the best advice I could share with the student is to really concentrate on school and to actually pursue higher education and really aspire to participate in community activities and civic engagement and study hard.
In your opinion, what was the most important class you ever took?
Gosh, I think they were all important, honestly. I unfortunately was not a very focused student. I was much more of a social butterfly in high school, and so I think I took classes that were pretty easy and I didn't challenge myself. Back then, I think that counselors kind of focused on students who needed to stay on track, who were getting in trouble. I think things have probably changed now, and so they are really seeking out the students who have potential. So I think that maybe I may have missed out being aggressive and trying to find that out, but I also think if somebody would have picked that up and kind of mentored me or said, you know, you really have an opportunity to do this, you should pursue it, X, Y, and Z, I probably would have taken it a little more serious when I was in high school. And I lucked out. I have like this whole life story as to how I ended up going to college, but it was purely on chance.
What was the typical Friday night for you?
Well,
High school?
my high school years, well, when my mom finally let me go out as a teenager, probably at 16 or something, I was a cheerleader. And so typical Friday night would be something like hanging out with the cheerleaders and probably the football players or the basketball players at a pizzeria. There was a place down on 6th Avenue called Shakey's Pizza, and that was sort of the popular joint at the time. And then for those of us who could actually sneak away, we would go to a place called The Hill on 36th, way out on 36th Street on the west side, and that was sort of kind of like the hangout where people would go. So I got to go there maybe a handful of times, but it was too late into the evening, so you know, with curfew and all that kind of stuff. But it was basically kind of hanging out with people from school after a football game or a basketball game, that kind of thing.
That seems a lot of fun. What's the best experience at Pueblo that you had?
Oh my gosh, probably a bunch of different ones. I did a lot of things, again, being a social person and not really focused on academics. So I was in the drama club. So I did some plays. I did one play that I can definitely remember, which was a lot of fun. And then I also was a cheerleader. My JV year, so I was a sophomore, and then through my junior and senior year, and then I also was a swimmer. So I did a lot of everything. Yes, to keep me out of trouble. But I think joining student council my senior year, because a really good friend of mine was always in student council, and to me I saw the student council as, oh, those are the guys that always get out of class because they're making posters and you know they're doing this, they're just getting out of class. And she says, you know what, why don't you just shut up and join the club? So I took her up on the offer and I ran for class president, and I think that was a real life-changing experience to some extent, because what I really learned was what it is to be a person who does advocacy for, you know, for in our case for my class, which is the senior class, but really learning how to work with a group of people, really learning what it takes to sort of run a governing body for an institution and making those decisions and being the voice for people. So I think that really sort of got me interested in being an active civic person in my life.
I wish I could have joined student council.
That's okay, you still can. The school year just started. I was a senior rep. I was never in student council before, so.
What would you want people to know about Pueblo, that they wouldn't never know?
Well, I think there's a lot of myths out in our community about Pueblo, that it's a bad school, it's on the south side, and we sort of grew up with the same thing. Although when I was in high school, it was a school that was predominantly Latino and predominantly African American students, with just a handful of other diverse groups. And that was before they started busing everybody. So I think that there's still a lot of myths to Pueblo, again, being on the south side, that it's, a school full of gangs and, kids that never finish school, these kinds of it's a reputation. And I think that once people really get to know some of the students that go here, I think that the teachers are just fantastic. I always hear great things. I work closely with school board members, and, Pueblo's on the books in terms of some of the stuff that they do. I really admire the fact that they have the communications program and a lot of the work that they do in media, which I totally missed out because it started right after I graduated. So I think that's another thing that this community can really look to as a high school that could maybe return to the community as well and turn to the kids who do that kind of work.
What was the most difficult part when you came to Pueblo?
I don't know. I don't feel that there was the most difficult part in terms of, I don't know. I think as a kid I was just in it in the moment and just kind of getting through life. And so to me, whatever challenges came my way, I don't know that they were challenges. I kind of just said I got to do it. I don't think we faced as much what students face today in terms of having to look a certain way or to dress a certain way. Those are certainly challenges that I think young people have to deal with that maybe we didn't.
Yeah.
But then again, I was in it in the minute. I was like doing stuff and being active and in the social scene. So maybe I didn't know if there was something that was a challenge for me. I just kind of faced it head on. But I think everything was okay.
What motivated you to graduate high school?
Well, it's a unique story because I knew that I was going to graduate from high school, but I never really thought that I would go on to college. I knew the principal at the high school at the time, sort of on a personal basis, which was Mr. Bob Acuna. And at the time, my dad was a retired person who was getting what we call Social Security benefits. And so because he wasn't working, I would get a check as a student, as a young person, to maintain the family household and stuff. And I had read in the newspaper that if I wasn't going to be in college by the time I turned 21, that I wasn't going to get that check anymore. So I was like, oh, maybe I should go to college because I still need that check. And it was like only $100 a month, but for my family it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And again, I wasn't college bound. I took what is the entrance exam for college, SAP, whatever it is? SAT. I took it, but I never got my score. Because I left high school in the middle of my senior year. Because when I saw this newspaper article about that you had to graduate to keep getting the Social Security benefits, I went to the principal and I said, this is my situation. As you know, do you think this applies to me? And he goes, I think so. So he said, let's take a look at your transcripts and see how many credits you have. Let's see if you can actually graduate. And this was in December. So I already had completed a semester. And I had doubled up on 2 English classes, though I didn't know it was an English class because Mr. Montgomery was the modern language was the class. And he was the fun teacher. Again, that whole social thing, like, oh, let's take the fun teachers and not the hard classes. So I took, and it ended up being an English credit. And then I went to summer school because I wanted to see boys from other schools. All for the wrong reasons, but it all sort of paid off. So I actually had enough credits to graduate, and I left high school. I had just turned 17. And they said, you need to go to Pima College and go take a test and enroll. And I'm like, what? Okay. So I marched myself over there in my little green Pinto and kind of just scrambled through. And, I had people kind of explain to me what I needed to do. But it took me 6 years to get my bachelor's. And, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So once I started to get into college, and I was like, oh, well, maybe this is a good thing that, getting an education really pays off. And that's why I think it's important for young people to think about that. If they don't get it in the home, and I didn't. I'm I guess we're calling us second generation. My parents came from Mexico, so it's like there was no push for that. It's like work, work, work. So not understanding the benefits of education, my parents, didn't realize how important that was. and didn't see what we call it a return on investment. So I was like, okay, I'll try it, and I did, and I lucked out. I mean, I call it being lucky. I wish I would have had somebody to tell me, you can do this, and you know, I wouldn't have been in college for so long, but it was fine.
Do you have any high school regrets?
I think probably just not being more academic, and probably, you know, seeking somebody else and being more proactive in my own education. But other than that, absolutely not.
Were you in activities or clubs or like just different stuff? Like, how about outside of school? Because I know most kids are like in the community.
Oh, sure. Well, let's see. Aside from doing cheerleading and all the other stuff that I mentioned earlier, I was on a synchronized swimming team, which is the ballet in the water kind of thing. Yeah, I did that for 7 years, and we did it right before the Olympics actually picked it up as a sport and put it in the Olympics. So, I mean, I know people who were Olympic bound, and I know some of the Olympic swimmers because they were competing. There was not a lot of teams in the country. We were one of the rare teams. We used to have to leave Tucson to compete because there was no teams in Phoenix. So back in the day, now they're all over because of the Olympics. So that was probably the one that really took up most of my time outside of anything that I was doing at school.
What did graduation like mean to you?
You know, it kind of catches you off guard because you're kind of just in it, you know, with your friends, and it's all about the social life, and you know, and because I wasn't college bound and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, I just knew that it was like the stopping point. It's like, okay, there's graduation. Well, I guess for me in my case, because I was already in college and I was just going to continue doing, I knew that it was just, okay, that chapter in my life is gone.
Yeah.
But it was like really nice to be able to come back and revisit with everybody and reconnect, you know, and now I still have a handful of friends from high school that I still see pretty much on a regular basis. But, you know, I think sometimes we think of graduation as a stopping point, and then we're not quite sure. I talk to high school students all the time, and they're not thinking about college at all, and you know, and they're seniors, and so, you know, I think that was sort of my story. But graduation is kind of that marker. Yeah, you succeeded because you graduated, and everybody's like, "Yay, that's great!" But I think we need to keep talking to our children about when you graduate from college, you know, as opposed to when you graduate from high school.
What's the most difficult challenge you faced as an adult?
I think for me it was, I always knew that in my life I would have to take care of my parents. So I go on to college. I get an undergrad in education in theater arts, and then I also stayed in Tucson. I didn't go anywhere. And my degree was in theater and in the arts. And in Tucson, you're not going to make it as an actor. As you know, ultimately you want to do that because obviously I pursued that as sort of a life goal. And because I didn't leave Tucson, part of the reason was because I knew that I would always end up taking care of my family, or wanted to stay home. I don't have a lot of siblings, and I'm the only female, so it's fairly typical for Latinas to sort of be the ones that end up being caregivers, you know, for elderly parents, and that ended up being my story. And I get very emotional about it because, you know, sometimes parents don't know when to let their daughters go. And a lot of times it cuts off dreams and aspirations for some of the people who want to pursue something outside of their home or outside of their community. So to me, it's important that sometimes Latinas have to make a really hard decision if they want to pursue a career. I don't have regrets because I had a very loving and wonderful relationship with both my parents, who I ended up taking care of because they got sick. But it does, you know, sort of hamper some of the decisions that I made because I didn't get to go away, or I didn't pursue something that I really, really passionately wanted to pursue. So I think that's something that has always been a challenge for me, and I get emotional about it, but I've learned to live with it, and I think it's okay. And so that was one of my hardest things, I think, as an adult.
How has like around Pueblo High School changed like since you've been here?
Well, unfortunately, I don't get to hang out on campus a whole lot. Obviously, the building physically has changed somewhat, you know, but I do hear some wonderful things that some of the students are doing, you know, when, with the media program. When I worked in the community, I worked for an arts agency, and I was able to direct people to Pueblo so that they can connect with some students and do some community-based projects. So we had done some mural projects here on campus as well, and so I got to work with some students, you know, and just sort of the attitude with some of these students, you know, they weren't, the students pleasantly surprised me in who they were and the aspirations that they had. And I think to some extent, I even had some bias in terms of how the students were just, you know, having, when I was from high school, I'm like, you know, the girls just want to go off and get married and have babies, and you know, and that's not the case. I mean, I think that there are some very, a lot of students who have a lot of aspirations, and they do a lot of work in the community. I do, you know, a lot of stuff where I meet kids from Pueblo out in this, you know, marching on the streets for human rights issues and social justice issues, and I'm always pleasantly surprised that there's people from Pueblo that are involved.
Yeah. What major historical periods or crises happened when you were at Pueblo?
Well, early 90s. I'm sorry, I wish it was early 90s. It was the early 80s. Excuse me. Rewind. I think the one that stands out the most is when President Ronald Reagan was shot.
Yeah.
I think I was probably in this room, if not the next room over, with Mr. John Huerta, who was teaching American government. It was third period, and it was like somewhere around 10 o'clock in the morning, and it just kind of burns in your brain when the news hits. Back then, it was very different because it takes a while for news to travel. We didn't have the cell phones, obviously. We didn't have a television in the room. You didn't get a phone call or anything like that. So honestly, I don't even know how that information got to us at that time. You know, maybe it came in from a radio that somebody walked into the room and told Mr. Huerta that that was the situation, and he told us, and I just remember, you know, where everybody just kind of looked at each other like, wow, the president's been shot, you know. So that was one of the most significant events that I can remember very clearly. That was 1980. 81.
What made you wanna pursue your acting career?
Well, I wish I had an acting career. I do act. I act locally, and I guess it's kind of a sub-career, but I don't know. I just know that a lot of times it's really nice to be able to get into another character and kind of get away from who I am and explore emotional lives of other things and that kind of stuff. So.
Yeah. Do you have any story, any story that could change a person's life after or change how they look upon life after Pueblo?
Any particular story? Ask me again.
Any particular story that would change someone's life. After they look at the video, what could change how they look upon their life?
If they're looking at my video, maybe the whole story about pursuing education and pursuing lifelong dreams or something that they're really passionate about, and really I think finding the balance between family and our culture. In my case as a Latina, for any Latinas out there who may be, you know, interested in pursuing and sort of, you know, getting away. I think mothers and fathers will always love their children regardless, that unconditional love. It may be hard to make that decision to leave, but they're their children, you know. In some cases it may not, but you know, it's taking the risk and pursuing it. And I think that if anyone could hear that it's okay to take that chance. I didn't do it, so I can't say that, yay, it worked out for me or whatever, but I would really advise anyone to take that chance, to explore that as a risk, because you know what, you can always, for the most part, you can always come home, I think.
Yeah.
And so that would be my advice.
We are done with the interview.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.